Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for another breakfast chat, and this is many people's favorite segment, and I'm having my bison rice and cranberry juice. Alright, let's talk a little bit about maxing out with bands and chains. One of the questions I get, and I get it all the time, and you can tell that's because there's a lot of people coming through who are obviously new to my channel. Maybe they're new to serious strength training, and they don't understand that bands and chains have become ubiquitous in the strength world. And it's not just powerlifting. Bands and chains are used by every elite sport that needs strength or power. Okay, go to any NFL gym, any even military gym for special forces. Go to MMA gyms, boxing gyms. All these places, any of these places where elite athletes are trained, you're going to see bands and chains. And this isn't something that just started a few years ago. This has been happening probably longer than most of you have been training, with some exceptions. But as far as it becoming a major thing, maybe the last 10 to 15 years, right? To where you'll find them everywhere in serious athletic gyms like that. It came out of the powerlifting world, yes. But why max against bands and chains? It's going to be different than why we would do speed work against them. Quite frankly, it comes down to number one, injury prevention. That's actually at the top of the list. And that's one of the reasons we do a lot of variations. I'm not going to get into the psychological aspects of this and why we would program this way for psychological programming purposes, but let's talk purely about the physiological, which is the most important part, and one of the reasons we have variations like this, why we max on variations instead of classic lifts all the time. Number one, lower injury rates. What's one of the things that you hear everyone out there terrified of? Oh, you shouldn't be maxing out all the time. You're going to get hurt. Anyone notice that in the gyms and in the groups of people who train with their maxes similar to what I do, bands, chains, specialty bars, rotating movements all the time, injuries from maxing are nearly zero. They are nearly zero. And that's twofold in nature. Because number one, we're changing the strength curve all the time. And if you're changing the strength curve, we don't get overuse injuries. Okay, your overuse injury risk starts dropping dramatically. And I've heard really good experts debate these points in debates. People who use more variation like that have lower injury risk because we accrue less specific fatigue at certain joint muscle angles and tendon angles. That because we're not lifting ultra heavy all the time at the exact same angle, tendons and stuff tend to get torn less often. And what ends up happening, because you're stressing these tendons and things with maximum weight at different angles and different points in the strength curve, we tend to end up with stronger, more robust, more injury resistant tendons. Okay, that's a big part of it. Again, most injuries are overuse related. It's not because you're necessarily maxing out or lifting heavy, it's overuse. You can get hurt with light weights too. Really light weights is less likely. But if we're changing the strength curves by either changing bars, putting on bands, putting on chains, we're changing the point sometimes where peak tension and stuff hit a tendon by 1 degree or 2 degrees. And it actually does cause a much lower risk of injury. Number two, we are oftentimes slightly reducing the weight. So let's say your max is 500 pounds with a straight weight on an exercise, but with chains, I don't know, it's 450 when you use 100 pounds of chains. And let's say, then you're doing 450 at the bottom of the lift and 550 at the top. Just give you an example, because that will be different for different people. That's just one situation that could occur, and that turns out to be your max when you use 100 pounds of chains. You're putting sometimes at the point of greatest compromise on some of the joints and tendons, you've reduced the tension 10% at that point. And oftentimes on many lifts, the very bottom of the lift is where that occurs. And we have the best leverages at the top. So what this ends up doing is it reduces the injury risk there also. But what it also does is it teaches you to accelerate harder. So bands to a greater extent than chains, but chains also, we also have research that shows that when you train with bands and chains, you learn to accelerate a weight more quickly. It produces better speed strength, right? And this has, again, been kind of demonstrated in the lab and studying athletes and things. We know that there is some merit to this. It teaches you to accelerate better, and it teaches you to not decelerate as quickly as we get near the top of the lift, because what happens a lot of times when we're pushing with a maximum weight or with any weight near failure, when you get to the easier parts of the lift, your body starts decelerating. And your nervous system will cause you to decelerate and recruit less muscle fibers through there. But what ends up happening is it's getting heavier at the points where we would normally decelerate. Your body will continue to activate motor units. So it teaches you to follow through and explode harder on lifts. Okay, we're not doing it to cheat. Like, so when you put up all these lifts and we're doing it, people are like, oh, you're trying to claim you're lifting X amount of weight when it's band or chain. It's like, no, that's not the point at all. You might be seeing it that way, but those of us who are using it that way, we're not. We're using it as a training tool. Okay, because at the end of the day, we're going to be judged on what we do with straight weight on classic lifts. This will improve you at those. And the other thing that people need to realize with maxing out is not as lift specific as you think it is as far as the benefits of it. Okay, a lot of people have big misconceptions there. They think that, well, if you just max out and practice maxing out of this one exercise, that it has complete movement pattern carryover, that's all that matters. No. These are low skill lifts. Squatting, benching, and deadlifting are not high skill exercises. Yes, technique matters. Yes, skill matters, but they're very, very low down the list compared to a lot of movements regarding skill. Okay, we're not dealing with the Olympic lifts in which practicing the identical movement millions of times helps you dial it in. Either you know how to squat, bench, and deadlift, or you don't. And most of the skills that you'll learn while doing them, you can learn with variations. So by us doing these different variations, we learn to get stronger at different angles. And what do? We learn to strain against a heavy weight. That's actually where most of the skill on maxing is, not necessarily just the specific lift and falling into the groove of it. Okay, it's learning to strain against a heavy weight. And if you're using a safety squat bar with 100 pounds of chains and you get to your max on that, or a training max above 90%, you are learning to strain against a heavy weight just as much as if you did a normal back squat. Okay, the idea is the same. You're still pushing with the same muscles against a maximum weight or a weight above 90%. Also, as far as intramuscular coordination goes, we get better intramuscular coordination when we push against or pull against weights that are above 90%. Okay, that's inside the muscle. The muscle doesn't actually care which bar or bands or chains you use. It just knows that it's pushing against maximum resistance or close to. It develops the same skill intramuscularly. The other thing to think about is that people who max on a wide variety of lifts are used to being pulled out of their grooves and having to find new grooves all the time. So you get people say, well, if you just practice with this, you're grooving all the time. Well, that's great until something goes wrong. What do we mean by that? When you hit a truly heavy max weight, and when you really go for a real max, oftentimes you get slightly out of your groove no matter what you do. That's what happens with truly maximum weights. Form breaks down and your weak links start to come out. And if you don't know how to groove through different angles, guess what? You may miss the lift and you may get hurt also. But if you are used to having variable strength curves, because let's say you squat not just with a straight bar, but with a safety squat bar, which pulls you forward, and a cambered bar, which pulls you backwards, like they pull you in different directions in and out of your groove. If you get pulled forward or backwards, you're more prepared to deal with it because you're used to lifting heavy weights, training maxes or true maxes, with these different directions pitching you forward or backwards. The same thing with bands and chains. If you're used to accelerating through the weight getting harder as you go up, when you hit sticking points, when the weight gets truly heavy with the straight weight, you are sometimes used to pushing hard through those different sticking points. And you're used to sticking points that are changing all the time on you, so you learn to just push through. Okay, it teaches you how to push through and explode through sticking points and misgrooves. Okay, this is a valuable skill. And people, if you step away from just powerlifting, you start looking at different sports, this is why these methods are used for a lot of contact and combat sports very effectively by elite coaches and trainers. Why? Because when you have to hit another human being, there's no guarantee where the angles are going to be. You can't ensure, well, if I just use perfect form, this is going to be the hardest part of my push against this other person. Well, that's not how it works anymore. You're going to be dealing with being thrown off balance, being thrown out of your groove, and continually changing dynamic environment. If you're maxing out all the time with different angles, different strength curves, it makes you a better athlete in those situations. So it comes down to just having a more well-rounded strength base, learning to strain against a wider variety of angles, and being more injury resistant. And that's just part of it. We're not even going to get into the psychological programming parts, because that's its own 30-minute discussion. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.